Retirement is often seen as a destination, but we believe it's an opportunity to pursue your passions, realize your dreams, and live a purposeful life. Great decisions, incredible lives. Retire with Intention podcast is about more than just money. It's about embracing the things that truly matter, the experiences, the relationships, and the impact you leave behind. Here is your host, John Creekmur.
Hey everybody, John Creekmur here. Thank you so much for being here with the podcast again or watching on YouTube, and another edition of helping people make great decisions to live an incredible life. And today, so excited to have Merle Griff here. And I'll tell you what, I have been blown away just about how people are transitioning in life. And way back in 1946, we started this little population thing, and it's called the baby boom generation. And so 1946 to 1964, we had the largest segment of people born here in the United States, and it created a huge generational boom. And my parents were born in that generation, so were my in-laws, and I was born about 5 years after the last part of that in 1969. And yet I have so many friends and clients that were born in that generation, and I just know from helping people navigate life, people transition into retirement and work through retirement, Merle, and the things that states are going through right now. I am so excited to talk with you today about what you do, your insights, your background, and how it applies to so many people, regardless of stage of life, of where they're at. It touches everyone's lives. Hey, Merle, thanks for being on the show. Can you introduce yourself and also walk with us a little bit about your background and what is it that you do?
Sure. So thank you so much for inviting me to be on the show. I really appreciate this opportunity. This is great. So I'm a psychologist by training. Actually started out working with young children. My area of specialty was 3 to 12-year-olds. I was a play therapist working with kids, and then developed some therapeutic techniques that involved seniors, that involved grandparents, because grandparents were really not involved in the changes that were going on in families. Got picked up as a consultant for what was called a multi-use geriatric program, and suddenly had the opportunity to open up a child daycare center and an adult daycare center. It was together in the same building. We were one of the first shared sites, intergenerational sites in the country. And from there, I just began to do more work in the adult day center. So I'm the CEO and founder of SarahCare Adult Day Centers. We are medical centers, healthcare centers. We take care of people during the day and they go home at night. We say 101 activities and home by dinner. And I'm the author of a relatively new book called Solace in the Storm that was published by Forbes. That's written for family caregivers, whether you're caring for infants, children, teenagers, young adults, middle-aged seniors. It's caregiving through the lifespan.
I'll tell you, a phenomenal book. And everybody, just so you know, listening today, there'll be links in the show notes. Make sure you check them out for Merle's contact information, but also for a link for the book. And I encourage you to get that. And Merle, I'm telling you right now, my wife Stacy and I, we're walking through a stage of life where we have my mom, who's 79 years of age, and she has some mobility issues and some other issues that she's working through. And my sister Rachel is a primary advocate for her. And then my in-laws, mobility issue, but also stroke Alzheimer's. I'm at 79 years of age. And so over the last couple of years, we have stepped in. And so we are living right now of walking through an area of huge need. And I know that this area touches so many of us in so many ways. And, is there a personal story as far as in your own life, how your personal experience as a caregiver for your mom influenced a little bit of the development of the SarahCare services?
Yeah, well, I should say, one of my children had a very significant learning disability. And so we lived with that. He actually, a psychologist who tested him said that maybe if we were lucky, he could work at a gas station. He now has a PhD.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
That is a practicing psychologist. So
what an incredible story. Wow.
Right. I was a caregiver for my mom. She lived in my home for about 3 years after she had a very dense stroke. We moved her from Florida back to Ohio, where I was living then. And I also took care of my husband, who had a chronic illness for many years until he passed away. So I have a lot of personal experience with family caregiving. It really did change some of what I do at SarahCare. And one of the things I think I learned through that is all of us to be more empathetic towards what I call the mourning process or the grieving process. So people have not passed away yet. They're still with us. But I remember the first morning, my mother was actually going to my own center, but she was paralyzed and was in a wheelchair. And at that point, we could not move her into the car. So one of my vans that had a wheelchair lift came to pick her up, to take her. So they came, they picked her up, and they left the driveway. I went back into my house crying hysterically. And my husband was like, what is going on with you? I mean, she's going to your center with your staff in your building where your office is. All right. I mean, I don't understand what's going on. All right. And I said, I said to him, Frank, at that moment, I realized that my mother, as I knew her, was never going to be the same. It was never going to be the same relationship. Things were not going to be the same. She was aphasic. She couldn't speak. And I realized at that moment that that's what families are going through, that their family member is still alive and still with them, but things have changed drastically. And there is a mourning and a grieving process. I also watched my children interact with both my husband and my mother. They became much more empathetic. And I became aware that the best way you can teach your children to be empathetic is to model for them. Because the way you treat other people and your parents and other relatives, they're watching and they're learning. So that was another thing that changed.
Can we kind of go with that a little bit, Merle? You had talked about the mourning or grieving process, and this is a big deal, I think, with a lot of the conversations I've had recently the last 3 or 4 months with family and with clients that are in a similar journey right now. Have you seen anything that helps people walk through that? Is that mourning or grieving? Is that different than the death of a loved one? Is it the same process? What does that look like?
I think it's different because the person is still there.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to, suddenly people realize that the other person in their life played a certain role and they can no longer do that. So whether it's a spouse who was taking care of the financial issues in the family and they were primarily handling it, or I speak to husbands whose wives can't do what they used to do before, organize their lives, create social activities. Now suddenly they're cooking or cleaning. Their lives change, people's lives change, and they have to adapt to a change in their role and a change in the way they interact with that person. It's hard.
It's very hard. It's very hard, and you're living through it. And I would think that it's probably a little bit different whenever we have a child that's walking through things versus having a parent walking through things. And I think it's probably different for every person, but it's definitely a journey that's a challenge to walk through. And I know with SarahCare Senior Solutions that I believe that you guys have a certain methodology. I think it's called the SarahCare Way.
Mhm.
Can you walk through with us what that is? I know that it's really about caring for people well, but can you kind of put some framework around that and what that means?
Sure. Let me explain to you what it is, and then I'll tell you how we got to that name. So what happens is in human and social services is we have programs and services. And then we talk to people and we interview them. And then we ask them basically to adapt to our program or our service. All right. We don't do things that way. What we like to do is adapt to people. So whatever the needs are of the family or the needs of that individual, we're going to build that. We're going to develop that. We pride ourselves in adapting. We adapt to people, not the opposite way. And that kind of holistic and customizable approach is what we call the SarahCare Way. We came to that because I was talking to my husband one day about it. And I said, I feel really strongly about this, that we need to adapt to people. And that's what we do. And we're very proud of it. And he said to me, yeah, that's the SarahCare Way. That's how you do things. So he named it. That's how we came to that.
Yeah, well, what a great way. It's a great memory too to something which is so pivotal, impacting so many lives. And for your husband to be the one that named that process, I mean, that philosophy, that's just a phenomenal thing. Now, with SarahCare, what's the scope of SarahCare? I mean, are you guys nationwide, or are you kind of just in one location, or Kind of walk through and let us know the scope of of where all you're impacting people.
Yeah, so we're in 13 states.
Wow.
So we're primarily in the Northeast, Southeast, Midwest. We have some centers in Texas also, but we're primarily in those states, but we're in 13 states. And we've been operating since 1985. So we've been doing this a long time.
It's amazing. Now, it was something that until I had personal experience kind of help working with my father-in-law, I was not really aware of the need and really the need both for to give dignity, both for the individual that is aging and going through things, transitions, but also for the family. Can you talk a little bit about maybe even the impact maybe of a caregiver as they help a loved one kind of work with your organization?
Right. So it has tremendous impact on the family caregiver. They need to refuel and they need that respite or they need to continue working. So it's a tremendous help to them. Daycare centers are staffed with nurses. They have RNs and LPNs, so they can do a pretty high level of care, much higher than home care, obviously, and the cost is less than home care. Advantage to the senior is they're getting out. They're getting out of their home.
Mm-hmm.
They're making friends. They're being with people of their own age. We go out a lot. We go to concerts, museums, shopping, movies. We have adapted sports programs, adapted golf, adapted fishing, adapted bowling. You want to do it, we'll do it with you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the big difference between getting out of the house and, I mean, like, we have very active men's clubs within our centers.
Mm-hmm.
Men want to be with each other for the most
Yeah.
part. And they're very, very active, and they have great food, they have great fun, but most importantly, they're not isolated
Mm-hmm.
or alone.
I love how you have really taken it and you've listened well to people and what they want to do, and then you adapt the services provided based upon what the need or desire is. And it's really just a unique experience. And I know it's been so impactful as far as you had mentioned the caregivers across the primary caregiver and probably even the secondary caregivers to a large extent. And that kind of brings me up to your latest book, the book that you wrote, Solace in the Storm. And that really addresses caregiving across generations. What motivated you to write that book, and what are the key messages that you really want readers to take away from that?
I found as a family caregiver that the information that was out there was disappointing and frustrating and not very valuable for me. If I heard one more time of someone say you should own the problem, great, I own it. Now what do I do with it? Terrific. So that wasn't working for me. And then the 10 steps to relieve caregiver stress wasn't working for me either. So I found that I wanted to write the book because I wanted to give people, and hopefully this is what it does, something they could do to either help them solve the problem, because when you have the problem, you need a solution, is what you need.
Mm-hmm.
That solution needs to be easy to implement in your life. And for many family caregivers, it has to take 5, 10, 15 minutes. I don't have an hour to meditate, an hour to take a walk. I mean, that's a lovely idea. As a family caregiver, I had no time for that.
Right.
So it was very, very frustrating for me. So this is designed to be quick, easy to implement in your life. You can do, if you only have 5, 10, 15 minutes, you can do it. And it has solutions. It's very solution-based. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, I wish that I had read your book 3 years ago, and having gone through the chapters and looked at everything, it's like I told Stacy, let's get this book right now. And I think she may have even ordered already, but for us to make sure we go through the book, because engage my mother-in-law as a primary caregiver to actually work through with our family to say, how do we actually not just survive this season, but thrive in the midst of it, enjoy time, create memories. How do we make sure that we care well? And so a phenomenal resource. Again, everybody, make sure you check out the show notes. There's links as far as to the book, as far as that Merle has written. And Solace in the Storm, phenomenal resource. And I know also you had mentioned about in your early on career as a psychologist working with children. And I know that really probably informed a lot as far as the philosophy here with SarahCare Senior Solutions. And I'm very intrigued with this family play therapy and intergenerational play therapy. Can you educate all of us on what that's all about? How did that come up? And what is some of the impact that you're seeing from that?
The family play therapy is designed to be just 10 sessions, brief therapy, and it's really designed to reconnect parents with play, how to really play with their children. And I know that sounds like, well, that should be a natural thing. Of course, you should know how to play with your children, all right? But people forget. And so we put them back in touch with what they used to like to play as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Use that and recreate that with the child. And that's a very important lesson, not only for children, but for other adults that you're caring for.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell people, look, if your family member likes to watch, if your child likes to watch a cartoon, or they like to watch reruns of I Love Lucy, whatever it is, our natural tendency is to use that time to do something else, fold laundry, do bills, do something else. No, 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 no. You need to sit down with them and you need to enjoy that time with them, because that time with them is not only important for you to refuel, but it's sharing time. And it gives you a sense of communication. My granddaughter, when she read my book, said, now I know why you watched all those animated cartoons or what animated things with me, because you were really trying to figure out how I thought. And I was like, oh, shucks, I should not have put that in the book. Right. Because they figured it out. But it's true. You want to learn what your children are thinking and how they think. And the way to do that really is through play.
Yeah.
The intergenerational play therapy recreates the role of grandparents. Because what I found was happening is we were changing the way we did things in the family and not including the grandparents. So for instance, when it came to disciplining the child, the parent would say, we're going to do it this way. And the grandmother would say, no, 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 we're going to do it. That's not the way to do it. You do it this other way.
Yeah.
And the mother would say, no, 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 no. Dr. Merle said, we're going to do it this way. Oh yeah, that was not going well, right? So I brought the grandparents in and I gave them a job. And their job was to come in every week. And the first thing I asked them is, what went better this week? What went well? Changes the whole mind frame and the whole way of thinking of the family. So instead of thinking about what didn't work well, and they're coming in to tell you, it's what worked well. And in this way, the grandparents were part of the change in the family system. They became more cooperative. They became like my co-therapist. They were really helpful. Grandparents are often forgotten as change agents in the family. And it's a shame because they have a lot to contribute.
And I'll tell you what, as a recently new grandparent, I appreciate that message. And if it's okay, I'm going to pull this 2-minute segment out and give it to my son for him to, hey, listen to Dr. Merle. She says I'm important as far as in the life of my 2 grandchildren. So, so that's okay if I slice and dice on the segment.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
And so I'll make sure that if he has any questions, I'll give you a call. And so the hey, I'm just thinking, you're in 13 states right now.
Correct.
And as far as that goes, I'm assuming as far as all those, Merle's not in every one of those locations. Are these franchise units that have the same principles? Can you kind of walk through that? Because I see, man, there's such a huge need everywhere, all 50 states, territories, everything. But I really see an expansion hitting more states to impact more families as something that's out there. Can you kind of walk through what you're thinking on that?
Yeah, sure. So many of them are franchise centers. We are one of the few franchisors of adult day health centers in the country. They run according to our standards, and the standard for adult day in this country and internationally is CARF. It's an accreditation standard, and all of our centers run according to the CARF standards. There's about 4,500 adult day centers in the country. Only 110 of them have CARF accreditation, and that includes SarahCare. And myself and one of my staff are actually certified CARF surveyors. When we go to look at things, we're looking at it through those very, very high standards. We would love more franchisees. I mean, it is a process and there is an interview process that we have to go through. But I find that my franchisees, even if they don't come from healthcare, and you don't need to come from healthcare to do this, you can hire what we call an executive director we will train to run the program for you.
Mm.
They love it. It's not a 24/7 business. It's a Monday through Friday. We close at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. Our ads for staff reads no weekends, no holidays, no evenings. So staffing is easier for us.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike, because I've owned nursing homes and assisted livings, unlike those settings, families love us. Get along really well with families. They're very grateful for how we're able to help them and the care that we give. So it's a lot of fun, and we help a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, Merle, I just see such a huge need out there, and just walking through ourselves here in Central Illinois and not having a solution like this, it's kind of been a struggle, quite honestly, trying to find an environment that philosophically that we agree with that really helps to preserve dignity and helps to actually build into who the individual is and who they were, and then having caregivers that are there that say, hey, let's actually make sure we walk through this well, and this partnership with the family. It's just kind of like I see a huge need. And so if anyone is business minded, we have a lot of listeners that are business minded. I'd encourage you, boy, reach out to Merle and chat about that, because I see it's a huge opportunity to bring us a huge need into the area. And the reason I think it's so big is because we do know that senior care is continuing to grow. People are living longer as advances in medicine. We also know population size is really large right now as far as in those that are 60 and older. And so with that being said, I would have to think everything changes so rapidly. And so, do you see challenges in the future? And then, are there ways that you're preparing for those challenges? Or do you see changes coming out of the pipeline? And how are you preparing for that?
So a lot of the changes obviously have to do with workforce and staffing,
Mm.
because people, regardless of whether it's nursing home, assisted living, home care, whatever it is, are having a lot of challenges with staffing. It's part of the biggest problem they have. Now,
Mm.
states have moved to paying family caregivers, some of them, and we're involved and beginning to become more involved in the training of
Mm.
those family caregivers. Those family caregivers still need respite.
Mhm.
And that has its pros and it has its cons associated with that, especially when it comes to financial issues and how that impacts the family and how that gets settled. The other big item, obviously, is technology.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
And there's a lot of technology out there. Families have to be very, very careful, and they have to look at it very carefully. And the biggest issue is, John, they have to involve the senior in that decision. I think what often happens is we don't ask, we don't
Hmm.
involve that senior in the decision.
I
And
love
then,
that.
it's like, no, 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 this is what you're going to do. And then when they get kickback and resistance, they're like, my mother just won't cooperate, you know?
Mhm.
I'm like, did you ask her? Did you get her feedback? Did you involve her
Mhm.
in this issue and a possible solution? And they're like, no, I guess I don't, guess I never asked her. I'm like, well, try doing that and see if you get less resistance, right?
And those conversations, they're so healthy, they're so useful, they create memories. And sometimes it challenges us, quite honestly, asking the question, because then you have to be prepared for whatever the answer may be. And how do you navigate that and shape thought and everything else? But I mean, that's just part of a relationship. And so, from my perspective, Merle, it's just an unusual stage of life. And I say unusual because so oftentimes as a caregiver, that's not your normal operating procedure. That's not what you do. And so now it's unusual for me. It's new for me. And then trying to navigate it, it's like, I want to care and care well. I'm just not quite sure what that looks like. That's why I so appreciate you. I appreciate the Care Center. I appreciate the book. It's just a phenomenal, phenomenal way as far as in giving guidance to people, help people make better decisions. One of the key things that I hear from my clients that are aging and from my family members is that they want to stay home. They want to maintain independence. Can you kind of walk through how Sarah Cares and how the organization, the educational materials, but also the resources as far as one of the facilities, how that helps people maintain that independence?
Sure. I mean, one of the things we do is we offer physical and occupational therapy or restorative nursing in our centers, because one of the biggest reasons why people end up in residential care is falls. they fall. And then it's kind of like a slippery slope, but it's downhill from there. So we do a lot of work in mobility and fall prevention. We also do a lot through our Brain Savers program on cognitive stimulation and memory enhancement, because that's the other big area that doesn't allow people to stay at home anymore. And then we use our resources for families, whether it's occupational therapists or specially trained electricians, to give them the technology that would allow people to stay at home, to make things easier for them.
Yeah, I think having the resources and the tools available really helps people maintain their independence and helps them stay at home if that's their desire that they like to work with. One topic I hear a lot of, kind of my last question here in closing, I hear this phrase sandwich generation. And I was kind of raised eating sandwiches, so I'm trying to, I don't think it applies to the sandwich I have at home, but can you kind of walk through with people as far as what advice you would have for someone that maybe is caring for children, but also elderly parents, and just the challenges with that, and kind of walk through whatever general advice you might have, or even specific advice you might have for folks that are navigating that season of life right now?
So, I mean, obviously the biggest issue is time. People feel very, very overwhelmed. It's interesting, there's some new research out that shows the median age of family caregivers now, including for seniors, is 35 to 49. So we always think of family caregivers as being like in their 50s or 60s. That's not necessarily true. And when you read what they had to say about being a family caregiver, they're very proud of it. They like being a family caregiver, but they said they themselves feel very isolated. Even if they're taking care of children and parents, they get very isolated from their own friends and their own peer group or their own support group. So making time to see your friends, to go out on a date night, to do some activity without your children and without your parents is very, very important. You have to refuel in order to keep going. Merle Griff wrote a book that's very interesting, but in the book, she says that if you had an appointment, let's say with a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, and a friend called you and said, oh, can you do this for me or do that for me? You would say, no, I'm really sorry, but I have this appointment with my doctor or my dentist. If you have an appointment with a friend, or you have an appointment for yourself, just to go to the library, for instance, or take a walk in the park, and someone calls you and asks you to do something, you say, well, yeah, of course. And you cancel that. No. You can't cancel these things. They're very important to you being able to continue to care. And I know that's hard. As a family caregiver, people would always say to me, you have to take care of yourself. And I would really want to slap them at times, because it was like, are you really? Okay, I could barely get through my day doing what I'm doing. But I had to teach myself, and I had to learn that it was really important to take a half hour and go see a friend or have a cup of coffee or whatever it was, so that I did not become isolated and lonely myself.
Merle, thank you so much for the stories today. Thank you for even communicating your own story of caring for your mother and for your husband, and walking through that and realizing a need. And you took those experiences and you have impacted people all across the country in such a powerful way. And I want to thank you for doing that. Oftentimes we go through things of life and we don't recognize that out of that story there can be huge impact for making the world a better place. And thank you for having that perspective and taking the steps and doing that. I know it's not easy doing that, but thank you for doing that and impacting. And I want to thank you also for spending time with us today on the show. And thanks for being here. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week right here on Great Decisions, Incredible Lives. And definitely want to encourage you to check out the show links, the show notes with the links for Merle, and definitely get a copy of the book as far as that was prefaced today, Solace in the Storm, Caring for Loved Ones at Every Generation. Phenomenal resource, very impactful. And if you're going through a situation of life, I'm sure it'll impact you. And if you have a friend that is, definitely get them a copy too. Anyway, talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you again for listening to the Great Decisions, Incredible Lives, Retire with Intention podcast with host John Creekmur. Follow us on social media, visit our website, and join our community of like-minded individuals redefining retirement and living incredible lives. Please leave us a review and share our podcast with others who may benefit. We wish you a future filled with purpose, fulfillment, and the joy of living your incredible life in retirement.